Why is Optus threatening disconnection to push cable customers onto the NBN?
And speaking of the NBN, who's actually to blame for NBN speed woes?
Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Alcatel.
Welcome to Vertical Hold, the tech show where we channel surf through the headlines in search of the big picture. I'm Alex Kidman, and I'm joined by a man they call the People's Poet, because I guess Rick Mile can no longer claim that title. It's the one and only Adam Turner. Also joining us is Australian IT editor Supratim Adhikari. Supratim, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, guys. Great to be here.
Adam, what's new in tech?
Windows Vista is living on borrowed time, with Microsoft due to end extended support on April 11. After then, Microsoft will no longer release updates, including security patches. So if you're still using Vista or you know someone who is, it's time to move on.
The Australian Transport Safety Bureau has issued a warning about electronic devices in flight after a passenger on a Beijing to Melbourne flight woke up with her battery-powered headphones on fire. Alarming stuff, although it's not clear what brand was involved or if their headphones were damaged in some way to expedite such a problem. I'd rarely sleep on flights anyway, and now I never will again.
Optus is in damage control after reports that it's giving cable customers in NBN-ready areas only 30 days to shift to the NBN, then using strong-arm tactics to convince them to sign up as an Optus NBN customer. Optus is ignoring the NBN's commitment to an 18-month switchover period, and to make matters worse, Optus has cut off some customers without any warning and tried to blame the NBN or the government, inflaming an ongoing feud between Optus and NBN over migration tactics.
Apple's iOS upgrades can be a bit of a headache, but the upcoming iOS 10.3 could be more problematic than most. Apple's switching file systems from the new OS, from HFS Plus to APFS, that's Apple File System, because it turns out Apple has an ego. The two file systems aren't compatible in any way, which means if something goes wrong mid-upgrade, users could lose their precious phone or tablet content. The solution, as always, is to back up your devices before any major system upgrade, which you should be doing anyway.
So, Alex, exploding headphones, is this a Snakes on the Plane moment?
Well, Snakes on a Plane was a really, really bad movie. I mean, it was terrible. It sold itself on just one thing. And this is a really weird story. And I mean, it's weird in the way that you don't really want to be on a plane where anything is on fire.
No.
And you especially don't want to fall asleep with Bluetooth headphones on. And I've got to be honest here. Last week, I fell asleep on a plane with Bluetooth headphones on. This week, it emerges that somebody else did the same thing and they woke up with their head on fire. So I feel for them, but we don't have a heck of a lot of data to go on with this one. The relevant authority hasn't said and seems to refuse to say which brand of headphone it was. So we don't know if this is like a high-end pair of Beats headphones or, given they were coming from Beijing, maybe they were Beats spelt with a double E, which could explain the issue. We just don't know. We don't know if they were damaged or if they spilled their vodka on them or anything like that. So we don't know what's actually caused this, but there has been this general push towards electronic gadget safety on planes. And if you've flown recently, you've probably hit the warning in amongst all the stuff about oxygen masks dropping and where your life jacket is that most seasoned travellers tend to ignore. They now tend to throw in something about if you drop or lose your mobile device in your chair, don't try and retrieve it yourself.
Yeah.
They're not doing that because they're worried about you damaging your precious iPhone. They're doing that because they're worried about you crunching your precious iPhone and it catching fire.
So, Supratim, do you take your life into your hands and listen to music when you're in the air?
I do, mate, and I'm a bit like Alex. I'm not a very good sleeper when it comes to the planes.
Not anymore, anyway.
Well, I've never been, and I guess now I can probably play a role in being the warden. I can be the Samuel L. Jackson looking after people and their dangerous headphones and gadgets and whatnot.
Yeah, I've got a few noise-cancelling headphones, different ones that I've used over the years, and I don't tend to fall asleep in them because they're big, bulky things, and I find they're too uncomfortable to fall asleep in them. But I do tend to wear them for extended periods, so the thought of them being on fire does not thrill me.
You know, the thing that gets me is that the sort of secrecy around the brand name and all of that, you know, I mean, that does make it a bit problematic because we just don't know the quality of the core product, right?
Mm. Yeah, my suspicion would be that it would be one of the lesser trusted brands.
That's right.
Like a Panasonic or a Sony, yes.
I know a genuine Panasonic when I see it.
Exactly. I mean, I guess the other problem here, and I suspect the reason they're not saying the brand is because they really haven't worked out exactly what happened.
Yeah.
Their statement is essentially been, we think the battery's caught fire. Well, yes. I think, as soon as somebody has a charred face, and the pictures they've got of this are not pleasant. As I said, I really do feel for the individual involved. But I think the issue is they don't know, so they don't want to come out and say, right, it was a Beats headphone, or it was a Sony headphone, or whatever, and then have Sony come back and say, well, hang on, no, but these were damaged, or this circumstance came in there, and then, end up in a legal quagmire. I guess the big thing there really is that also that difficulty of most people don't really know or don't really think about damaged gadgets and what those actually mean. Let's say for the sake of argument that these were a set of damaged headphones in some way. People wander around with like shattered screens on their phones for absolutely ages without thinking about the fact of, well, that's not just a screen that's taken a fair impact, it's all the stuff behind it as well. Guilty
on that charge, walking around with a shattered phone.
You shouldn't be allowed on planes, mate. You just shouldn't be allowed on planes. So, Adam, Optus is playing real hardball with its cable customers to get them onto the NBN or onto Optus NBN plans, it seems. Are they ethically right? Are they legally right? Are they just being ISPs?
They are ethically very wrong. Legally, I think they can get away with it, and that's the problem. The NBN has sort of made this open promise to people that you've got 18 months. Once the NBN is available in your area, you've got 18 months to move across from whatever technology you're on now to the NBN. And I think there's an agreement with Telstra in there, but what they haven't really revealed is that agreement is not universal. Now, Optus has found out that we're not keeping their HFC cable network as part of the NBN because it just wasn't up to scratch, which people tried to tell them in the beginning, but that's another story. So now that Optus knows that this network's not being kept, as soon as the NBN gets to your street, and if you're on Optus cable, Optus ring you up and say, you've got 30 days to get off the cable or we're going to cut you off and you're going to lose your phone number forever and you're going to lose your broadband and we're going to kick your dog and the whole thing. You need to fix this now. And everyone goes, oh, what do I do? And they say, oh, don't worry, we'll send some around and sort it out. Next thing you know, you're an Optus cable NBN customer on a 24-month plan. It's, nice little scam if you can pull it off. And they have been pulling it off for a while. And this is what I'm wondering about, and Supratim, maybe you've got some insight into this as well. This was going to happen. I know that behind the scenes, NBN and Optus have been arguing about this for a while. NBN tried to stop them from doing this, but Optus say that their cable customer agreement gives them the right to do this. What have you heard about that, Supratim?
Well, Adam, I want to pick up on Alex's point before. That is Optus's behavior just another example of ISPs being ISPs? And I think there's an element of truth to that. When it comes to Telstra and Optus, especially, the two big incumbent players, it is very important for them that they prevent churn. And NBN provides this is a once in a lifetime sort of a migration, forced migration of the entire customer base from an existing ADSL infrastructure to a completely new wholesale infrastructure. So you can see why Optus and Telstra will be very incentivized to flip their existing customers as quickly as they can.
Yeah, I totally understand that. And my understanding is that Telstra are not completely without blame here. Yeah, that story is still brewing. Stay tuned. But
Telstra's got a huge and long history in ADSL.
But Telstra and Optus have
of saying to other ISPs, hey, look, there's no ports available when customers try and get access. And then suddenly if you go through Telstra, it's like, oh, yeah, we've got plenty of ports.
Telstra's history of abusing its power is one of the reasons why we built the NBN in the first place. There's not much argument there. And right. Optus don't have a great track record either when it comes to treating their customers. You can't... The blame is to be shared around.
Well, just speaking of blame and speaking of the villain, I guess what's interesting now is that the mantle of the villain no longer lies with Telstra per se, but more so with NBN Co.
And that's the interesting thing, though, that when this was happening, Optus was ringing people up saying you've got 30 days to get off the cable and onto the NBN. And then when people say, oh, that's not fair, I'm supposed to have longer, Optus in some cases was saying to people, oh, it's not our fault. The NBN's making us do it, or the government's making us do it. So they're going out there and making the NBN look like the bad guy.
Well, look, the 30 days limit is completely outrageous. And I'm very surprised that the ACCC has not taken a stronger stance on that. There's a huge gulf between 30 days and 18 months. Now, there is a clause but that is particular to the HFC area, the pay TV area, that NBN Co makes clear, well, not clear, but rather buries it in small print in its letters, that the ISP has a right to disconnect that service before the stipulated 18-month period. But I'm pretty sure 30 days isn't the sort of the mandated or the optimal time that's put in.
I've been frustrated in that a lot of bodies and agencies that I've spoken to have kind of wanted to pass the ball on this one. My conversations with the TIO, they basically, what readers are telling me is that I complained to the TIO and they said, we can't do nothing until they actually cut you off. And when I've spoken to all these other government agencies and bodies about it, 9 times out of 10, they say to me, it's not our thing, you'll have to talk to the TIO. So yeah. I get the feeling that everyone knew that this was coming, right? It's been brewing in the background. And now that it's come out in the open, they all just want it to go away, which is not really fair on the people who are having, old pensioners who are being rung up, having their phone cut off, but everyone just wants this to quietly go away.
Well, I don't know if they want to go away or they want to get it to a point where it becomes sort of part of a much wider number, where the numbers sort of rationalize themselves, right? Where they'll say for every one fault, there's 10 successful migrations. Because the one thing about the NBN process that we need to understand now, as it stands, this project is hostage to the business plan that it's been tied to, and the technology choices that it's been tied to. And there's nothing it can do now without compromising that position. So when we talk about, should NBN Co ditch fiber to the node and go to fiber to the curb? Well, sure, sure it can do it, but will it? Absolutely not, because it's hostage to the numbers. It's hostage to what it has promised its majority shareholder, which is to connect 8 million premises by 2020. And it just will not waver from that perspective. It doesn't matter what the end service is or what the problems are. Unfortunately, this project is now is sort of tied to a trajectory from which it'll be very difficult. Take something incredible for the NBN Co's management to do a complete about turn on the technology choices or the pressure it puts on ISPs when it comes to making wholesale revenue.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned fiber to the curb. One of the things that I've heard mentioned is that when they said that the Optus HFC network was going and fiber to the curb was coming in, some people seem to be under the impression that the entire Optus cable footprint is now getting fiber to the curb, which is close up to 2 million homes. But my understanding is it's only the Optus footprint that doesn't overlap with the Telstra footprint. There's 1.5 million homes that have both. If you've got Optus cable and Telstra cable in your street, Telstra cable is going to become NBN cable and you will end up on that. If you have Optus cable in your street and not Telstra cable, then you might end up on fibre to the curb.
What's fascinating to me about this, and I'm in that precise position that you're outlining, Adam, is the speed with which they both can and can't implement this. Because it's almost comical. Optus is kind of putting a gun to people's heads, but it's actually for a cable that they didn't build or maintain themselves, because the cable that they did build themselves, they didn't maintain.
Yeah.
But so the speed with which they can switch people over to the Telstra cable is because the Telstra cable is still basically good in some areas only. I'm in that dual cable kind of area, but I'm actually a full 2 years away from when they reckon they'll actually get an NBN service to me. And there seem to be a lot of people actually in that position. An awful lot of the HFC stuff seems to be quite heavily backloaded in that way. So I think this is a problem actually which may well keep rolling, because of course Telstra could well do similar kinds of things once once all the Optus cable is boiled out of the system.
Yeah, absolutely right, Alex. You're absolutely spot on. That's it. We can absolutely expect that to happen, because as far as the Telstra HFC footprint is involved, they are still working on it. That's still a work in progress. I mean, as soon as that's lit up and Telstra has the resources in place, they will do exactly the same thing. They're going to start flipping customers and try to hold on to them rather than trying to get them to pick or choose whatever other ISP they want to go with.
Now, once that area becomes, if you're on Telstra cable and the Telstra cable in your street becomes NBN cable, how can you then have 18 months to switch from Telstra cable to NBN cable? It can't be Schrodinger's cable, can it?
What you've got to bear in mind is that what an end consumer is sold is just an NBN package. I mean, they obfuscate this an awful lot now in terms of your technology choices. It's kind of clear if you know what you're looking at, and it's very clear if you've actually bothered to keep track of it to more or less work it out. But for the average consumer who hasn't bothered to look, and, you know, putting my day job cap on, we've done research there which suggests that an astonishing percentage of people simply haven't looked at the technology they're getting. As far as they're concerned, they're just getting NBN. And at that point, it's, you know, is it Telstra cable, is it NBN cable? It's probably a little bit irrelevant. The point is, though, what they should be ending up with is that ability to pick and choose, is that ability to actually compare prices and packages, which for a cable customer, of course, is revolutionary, because you had the choice, if you're in an area as I am, of two providers, and in some cases, if you were in an Optus or a Telstra area, you had the choice of one provider, and if you were a certain distance from the exchange, that was it for broadband. That was all you could get.
And that's exactly the prospect that Telstra doesn't want to happen on its HFC footprint, or on that HFC footprint that coincides with much of Telstra's existing infrastructure, because it has two ways to keep that churn down. One is to use the bundled products that it'll put in, but the other one, obviously, is to force customers to just stick with the existing provider, or say that you're better off to quickly switch to Telstra than take a risk. And you know, the thing is, it does take time. I mean, I will tell you, I'm quite astounded at how many people I've met in recent days who don't even know about the 18-month migration period, right? The cutoff date, which I find quite astounding. And a number of people who are saying that, well, I don't want to switch to NBN because my ADSL service or my pay TV, you know, my cable service is very good. Why should I move to NBN?
You know, this segues actually very nicely into that whole issue of NBN speed quality. Because you're right, there's an awful lot of people who don't seem to know about the 18-month cutoff. And just in case you were listening and you weren't clear on this, once the NBN is declared in your area, you are meant to have, as we've discussed, you don't always get, 18 months, as Adam said, to switch over to an NBN plan, at which point, whatever your existing connection model is, be it ADSL, be it cable, it will be terminated. Now, the cable will not, someone's not going to come and rip the physical cable out of your wall, but for the ADSL and for the phone line, the relevant signals that enable that will be switched off. It will be useless to you. You will need an NBN connection in order to have both a phone line, if that's still important to you, or broadband. And you need to be prepared for this, because you can't just go, well, I've got 18 months, so 17 months and 29 days into it, I'll make that change. Well, no. As with any broadband technology, it takes a bit of time to do the provisioning, to make sure that everything is, you know, all the ones and zeros are lined up in effect. So it's actually something, if you are in an NBN-ready area, you should be thinking about immediately. And even if you're not, you should actually be considering it and keeping a bit of an eye on what's out there so you can work out what a decent plan is. But a decent plan is only part of the picture, because as we're seeing, especially with a lot of the fibre to the node customers, the speed of what you get is also a contentious thing.
So I guess that makes it time to play the NBN Speed Blame Game. Supratim, tell us what you know about the NBN Speed Blame Game.
Well, Adam, there's plenty of blame to go around on all sides, so it's a very equal opportunity game in that sense. And
I like it. Yeah.
And you know, you mentioned FTTN. I mean, you know, the FTTN component of the network is just at a very nascent stage. So we've got to hold on to our hats. The fun is only beginning when it comes to the copper. But what we do know from the existing premises that are ready for service, and especially the ones that have a service activated on them, is the end speed that that a customer or consumer ends up with is dependent on a number of factors. I mean, the access technology and the state of the physical infrastructure is one, but of course the other very major factor is just how much bandwidth and how much capacity the ISPs are buying from the wholesale monopoly provider, which in this case is NBN Co.
So
this is the infamous CVC, isn't it?
The CVC, absolutely. It's been a huge bone of contention for the ISPs, and from an industry perspective, you can understand that, because while you have, you know, there's a it's a dual component price in the sense you've got an AVC price, and that's a price that the ISPs have to pay per month per subscriber, and that's basically the sort of it's analogous to a line rental fee that retail service providers have until now recently been paying to Telstra for its wholesale network, for access to their network. The CVC is a little bit more complicated, a little bit different, because now what you have is in some ways an artificial scarcity created around capacity. So an ISP has to buy sufficient capacity to make sure it can deliver the end service that it's promising to its customers. Now, critics of NBN Co have maintained that this is an artificial scarcity.
So if I wanted to look at this in terms of old world utilities, right, is this the same as me signing up with a retail water provider, and lots of people in my area sign up with a retail water provider, but then we're in the mercy of how much water they actually buy and how big the pipes are that they rent? So there might be a lot of us in the area, and the pipes in the area might be great, but because our water supply is skimping on their deals where they get their water from, we end up with stuff all coming out of the tap. Is that a reasonable way to look at it?
In some ways, that's right. But I guess another analogy that we could use here, using old world utilities, is that this is really about how wide the pipe is that you're buying, how much space within the pipe you're buying to move the traffic, in this case from NBN Co's network, onto your network.
But the problem's not with the pipe itself, though, is it? And that's the problem. Some people think when there's nothing coming out of the pipe, then the problem is with the pipe. But the problem might not be with the pipe, but how much space in the pipe your internet service provider's paid for.
Exactly. And
people can't get their head around that. It's just easier to blame the NBN.
Well, the thing is, in some ways, the criticism of the NBN is not entirely unjustified, because the point is, if you're creating a wholesale monopoly, well, why should you create blocks inside the pipe, right? And tell ISPs that, well, no, you can only buy this much space, or you're going to only have, you'll have to pay whatever metrics are used to make that costing, right? And to their credit, NBN has brought the prices down, and the prices have, they were initially priced at 20 megabits per second. Now, they're going to be within a range of between $11.50 to $8 per megabits. Now, that's a substantial downgrade on the original CVC modeling. And I can be, I can pretty much 100% guarantee that CVC price is not moving any lower, because as I mentioned earlier, that price is critical to NBN Co making its return. And again, as I mentioned, this is again an example of NBN being hostage to the economics of the project that were laid out many years ago.
But if I'm an M customer, I've got no visibility into this. I can't tell whether or not my ISP is skimping on the bandwidth they buy from the NBN, and the NBN and no one else has the power to say to an ISP, you're being a tight ass, you're not actually buying enough bandwidth for your customers.
Where this is disruptive from the consumer endpoint is your classical ISP model was always to overpromise and underdeliver, because you could figure that an awful lot of people who would buy, a huge capacity or an unlimited so-called plan really wouldn't actually hit it all that much. You just have that small percentage of heavy users. But the way we use the internet has changed so rapidly, especially and most obviously for streaming video services like Netflix. Because suddenly people are going, right, well, I've bought this pipe and I'm actually going to use it. That's where it throws everyone for a loop, the big and small players. But I think the thing is, it genuinely more incentivizes the big players. The big players can probably trade off their brand, and to a certain extent, for some of the bigger players, some of the back-end infrastructure they've got that means that they can lower some of their other costs, which means then, in theory, they can be a little bit more aggressive on pricing and push out the little guys who, of course, can't quite play in that same field and may be doing that kind of CVC skimping in order to get by. The sums are really hard to calculate, and I don't envy the small RSPs in this.
Well, the small RSPs, Alex, do have one advantage, though, that in the sense that when it comes to, rationalizing back office costs, they probably start off at a starting point where they have very little cost to begin with, right? So there's no cost of having to get outsourced jobs, get rid of people. A lot of these guys already don't have that, already have a very rationalized structure there.
They don't have the legacy infrastructure to deal with.
And in some cases, the legacy infrastructure, a lot of these guys, this is one of the reasons why TPG, for example, popped such a hit, last year on its share price, because TPG said we have a lot of legacy infrastructure, and a lot of that has to, the cost of maintaining that right now and the cost of decommissioning a lot of that is going to have to be priced in, and that's going to, so that creates in that case, the ISPs, the smaller ISPs do have some advantage in that. And the other one obviously is that they can be more price competitive. Under the current regime, it's a question of just how price competitive they can be. There is another aspect to the pricing that we may well see play out by the end of this calendar year, and that is that the ACCC actually getting involved.
Yeah.
And perhaps making a call and unilaterally saying that the AVC price goes up, the CVC price becomes a constant and it's reduced significantly. Now, that is potentially one remedy to the current situation, because NBN Co has to make its money. The ACCC realizes that. And given that CVC prices as they stand now can no longer go any further, they can't go lower anymore, the one thing that can be done is the ACCC getting involved and raising the AVC prices. And I know there are some telcos who would be quite happy with that scenario, or would be willing to consider that scenario.
But the ACCC wants to step in on the speed blame game as well, and I'm not convinced they're going about it the right way. My understanding is what they want is for internet service providers to give their customers a realistic expectation of the speeds you'll get, which of course they can't do. Like Telstra, just switching to wireless for a minute, Telstra's new Nighthawk router, if you read the side of the box, does anywhere between 5 and 300 megabits per second. In other words, if it's working, leave us alone. And it's the same with fixed line. So I think that ACCC should step in and force them to buy enough bandwidth, rather than just force them to admit that they're doing the wrong thing and still fudge the numbers so much that you can't tell the difference. What do you think about that?
Well, ACCC has to be, in some ways, they are also the architect of the current situation, right? They have played a role in what has happened. You could say this entire CVC construct is based on their decision on mandating 121 points of interconnect, right?
Yeah.
Now, many people can easily say, well, the ACCC should have never done that, right? They shouldn't have listened to the big end of town. They shouldn't have listened to the Telstras and done that, right? So in some ways, you understand that ACCC can only push the envelope so far. I think it's fair to say that they have got a very strong hand when it comes to creating a broadband monitoring regime that I know Rod Sims is very committed to. Now, this in the past has been very strongly contested by the industry, which has said that no, you should rely on self-regulation. I think right now ACCC has probably got the strongest chance of getting through some sort of a monitoring regime that's run and overseen by the competition regulator, to actually force the RSPs to play ball. But I get the sense the ACCC is not willing to be as courageous as you're hoping they would be by mandating the RSPs to buy, force them to buy bandwidth, because, especially the listed ones will then create a real ruckus and will say, well, you can't force us to become an unprofitable business and make decisions that hurt our shareholders. That's a battle I think Rod Sims is not willing to fight.
You can't force us to offer a decent service.
Yeah.
But the ACCC are the people who are surprised when the price of petrol goes up before a long weekend.
That's right. That's right. I think Rod Sims is trying to be very pragmatic when it comes to the NBN and this issue, because I think in some ways he doesn't want to pick a fight which may end up with a negative connotation for the ACCC and its overall role in the telecoms sector, because you might remember it wasn't that long ago that the Vertigan review into the telecom sector had a recommendation which said that we think the ACCC should be pushed out from regulating the entire sector. We should create a new regulator that looks after the telecoms industry. So I think Rod Sims is mindful of that, of picking which fights he can win and the ones he can win easily, rather than picking a hard fight that could end up rocking a few boats on his end as well.
That just about wraps it up for another episode of Vertical Hold. Got any thoughts about the NBN, good, bad or ugly? Drop us a line via Twitter or the Vertical Hold Facebook page. Thanks to Supratim for joining the show this week.
Great to be here, guys. Thank you for the opportunity.
And thanks everyone for listening. Remember, if you like what you hear, hit that subscribe button. Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Alcatel.